mentioned, I'm Neil Patterson. Don't worry about it, I'm Scottish now, it's absolutely fine. I'm the Media and Technology Correspondent for Sky News. Just first things first, if you have any problems with your Sky Plus box, please do not press them to me. I take a fit of other things, I just appear on them. Certainly, wearable technology is something that's of huge interest to those of us who work in broadcast media. The idea that soon we might be able to go live from anywhere armed with nothing more than a set of spectacles is certainly a pleasing one, particularly if you've ever smelled a Sky News camera or sound recorders. Plus, if there is something pending for embedded technology, that might mean that elderly BBC news readers don't appear on camera clutching a sheet of printer paper rather than their iPad. I think we'll all agree that would be a good thing. This session will follow a slightly different format to the last. There will be a question and answer session to follow. But first, we're going to have three presentations from some key thinkers in the field. Andy Goodman, the Managing Director of the service design consultancy Fjord, Dr. Chris Brauer from the Centre for Creative and Social Technologies at Goldsmiths in London. But first, Despina Papadopoulos from Studio 5050. Despina is a design strategist, systems thinker and educator with over 16 years of experience in designing systems, building prototypes and working with organisations to introduce innovation at the point where social structures and technological possibilities collide. Despina.
We're going to talk about design in very abstract, big terms, and then hopefully talk about it and we're going to make it more concrete. In 1854, not very far from here, there was a cholera outbreak, and John Snow, an anesthesiologist at the time, decided to actually map the occurrence of cholera. So he developed a map that mapped households where there was an outbreak and pumps. And he did so by actually going around and asking questions, asking people about their habits, where they get their water. And he also found out there were some outliers. Well, first of all, he realized that most of the occurrences were taking place around the Broad Street pump. But he also realized that there were some very nearby places that had no cases. So one was a workhouse, and after really investigating and talking to the community, he found that they had their own water supply system, and a brewery, where it turned out that the workers had access to free beer, so they drank more beer than water. There were some other outliers, and again, through talking to the various residents, which of course today would have been a little bit harder because of privacy concerns, he would create this map where he would be able to really understand how the disease developed. And of course, by doing that, he was able to create a document and prove that, contrary to popular belief, it was not because of miasma, it was not because of bad air, but in fact, the disease was waterborne. So, what John Snow did, and really earned him not only the title of the father of modern epidemiology, but really showed us a different way of looking at data and mapping information. But he also used what designers proclaim to do, or hopefully often do, is use design as a tool of uncovering, of developing patterns and relationships between information and entities that do not immediately appear so. And of course, by mapping, which was a tool that was already in place, he used the tool of mapping to also communicate information to policymakers and to residents themselves. And in the parlance of design, he did a lot of ethnographic research. He went around from house to house and asked each member of the household about the water source and whatever the relationship was to water. And it's also important to note that he was quite well embedded in the community. So it was not a community that was unfamiliar to him. So there was already a fundamental portion of trust in that transaction. And ultimately, what he did was change, or work towards changing the mindset. So that the cholera does not come from the air, it comes from water. And really thinking about the problem differently, and with meeting a lot of resistance from politicians and from community organizations. And that changing mindsets is a very important part where designers can play an active role. And to use a term like Donella Miller, this really important system thinker, he also tried to find a leverage point. In this case was very simple, just remove the handle from the pump and therefore stop access to water. But designers in this process of mapping and uncovering the relationships between each element becomes a way of finding those relative points. So today, 159 years later, our problems that very much problems that started and exemplified in Soho in 1854 are only growing more complex, more wicked. So, of the world's 7 billion people, about 6 billion have mobile phones, which is a tremendous opportunity and a tremendous number in its own right. But only 4.5 of this 7 billion have a working toilet or latrine, and 2.5 really defecate in the open. They do not have proper sanitation. So, I'm sorry, 1.1 billion defecate in the open. These are pretty staggering numbers if you really think about the relationship between 6 billion cell phones and only 4.5 billion working toilets or latrines. And what's interesting in this sort of position of numbers, I think one fundamental question to ask is, what can you do with a cell phone and what can you do with a toilet? Because maybe there a lot of answers emerge. And when you think about a cell phone, you also talk about individual capabilities. Something that you can do for your pleasure, for connecting to business, for finding access to market data, banking, mobile payments, so forth and so on. But when you talk about a toilet, we're really talking about community-based capability, something that affects our entire community. And as projects like community-led sanitation exemplify quite well, for sanitation to work in a community, it must be total. So if 10 of us have a toilet, but 3 of us, or even 2 of us, defecate in the open and contaminates the water system, then the benefit is only tangible if the entire community engages in this practice. So when we talk about what we can do, we're really talking about capabilities, to borrow a term from the economist Amartya Sen, philosopher Martha Nussbaum, and start thinking about what kind of capabilities do we collectively work towards and what capabilities we want for ourselves and for our communities. And ultimately, when we talk about capabilities, we talk about ideology. And what is the fundamental ideology that we have about what a good life is, a dignified life? How do we want our relationships to be? And what kind of values emerge from this ideology, which in turn translates into choices that we make for ourselves and for our community. And of course, something we heard a lot about this morning, about the kind of infrastructures we build for our community and to enable the given capabilities to take place. In the field of technology and design and communicate and everything we talked about today is really about turning capabilities into opportunities and looking at what kind of opportunities we have as we have an acceleration in innovation and in really understanding that it's the fundamental mindsets that we need to change in order to have growth and development. So where is the opportunity for design and for technology, and what kind of practices we need to put in place in order to actualize these very opportunities? And in my work as a designer for the past 16 years, having done having very trajectory, starting from actually making things and being very much involved in the process of making and experimenting, making all the hardware toolkits or wearable devices, and trying through this experimentation to understand the social implications of artifacts, and then moving on to develop bigger systems for development organizations or large enterprises. I found that the most important aspect of our work and the most successful projects and collaborations I've ever had were based on having a very clearly articulated principles that were really underwriting the entire effort, the entire project enterprise, and trying to really then understand how those principles translate into value, what kind of values flow from those fundamental, quite basic principles, and more importantly, how value that we create starts flowing and how do different stakeholders or nodes in a system, because actually ultimately we all are creating systems, whether we're creating a tool or we're creating a different soil, there's a system that takes place. So how does this value flow? Even if this value is experienced differently from each stakeholder, there is a fundamental essence, there's a little principle that is attached to this value. So how can we, as designers and communicators and entrepreneurs and technologists, be clear about the value that we want to really flow in that system, and how then that translates to requirements and specifications, not only from the engineering perspective, not how we actually build this, but how are we making sure that these principles and values that we hold important really translate and manifest and embody themselves in our requirements and specifications. And of course, doing this through very multiple rounds of prototyping and iteration, so this notion of embodied value can be experienced, tested, and iterated. And more importantly, and often it's amazing the number of projects I've been working in where the notion of outcome and impact, and especially of that human value, human and social impact, is very much pushed on the side, and it's very much the attitude, well, we'll build it and we'll see how people will use it, which is fine, but not always. And ultimately, what kind of shared meaning and what kind of environment of shared meaning can we contribute to, so we don't run the risk of becoming overly reductionistic and pretending that our body, ourselves, our human social experience is really placed in one domain of who we are. And how do we really ensure that presence, engagement, mindfulness, authenticity remain intact in this exchange of value? And that value is not really only sensed as a commodity, but value as something that is exchanged in an equitable manner, and that exchange, whether it is ecological, social, cultural, technical, is experienced in a uniform manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Chris Brauer from the Centre for Creative and Social Technologies at Goldsmiths. Chris is a senior lecturer and director there. Formerly a journalist, so he can't be a bad guy, and a programmer. Chris's research interests focus on the way that emerging technologies interact with social life, economics, psychology, and culture. Today, he's going to be speaking about big data, wearable computing, and quantified. So, following on from joint research between the Centre for Creative and Social Technologies and the cloud computing provider Rackspace. Chris.
Well, thanks for having me here today. While they're flipping it over, we also run a series called Innovation in the Wild out at Goldsmiths, where we engage with industry and people that are doing interesting projects. We've seen so many interesting ones here today, but if anybody has a project that they'd be willing to discuss with our students, then we should fist bump those name tags and swap details, because we're always very keen to get as much engagement around this kind of stuff as possible with our student base. This project that I'm discussing, it's the first time I've had a chance to talk about this project in this kind of domain. It's called the Human Cloud Project. We did it with Rackspace. All our research is done with corporate partners out of CAS. It was a combined quantitative mixed study. We did an ethnographic study of 26 participants over about 6 weeks, and a survey of 4,000 adults in the US and the UK, all related to wearable tech. The project generated an awful lot of media attention. We had a long segment on Newsnight that they followed up on this, and we wore the technologies ourselves. We worked with about 20 different wearable tech devices over a period of time in all the different forms, and we used them ourselves and sort of participated in the research in our own way by experiencing some of the phenomena around this. Now, the headlines that were generated, were covered in about 400 media organizations worldwide. Wearable tech is very, very hot at the moment, and so people were really interested in the work we were doing. But the way the angles that were taken generally in the media were focused around particularly Google Glass, and even one statistic that was in our quantitative survey, which indicated that people wanted, that 1 in 5 in the UK would like to see Google Glass banned from public spaces. I want to talk today about some more in-depth aspects of the research that we covered off. This actually had Radiohead playing in the background when I did the presentation. Kids are happier, more productive. Quantitatively, it was quite remarkable. 61% felt more efficient wearing these devices, more fitter. You know, you can see the data there yourself, more intelligent, more informed, even more attractive in instances, certainly enhancing their lives, boosting their personal abilities in harnessing the power of these wearable technology devices. So our quant survey brought back a lot of things that we kind of followed up on in a lot more detail. And our interactions with the individuals that we did the research with were then very, very personal and tended to drift into a sophisticated interaction with social and cultural, as we say, value, but also values and the kind of interaction between value and values. Here's a participant just quite intimately saying, you know, it just hasn't gone well today. And, you know, only 394 steps and then not enough sleep and, you know, tough day at the office. The adoption and uptake of these devices follows a fairly traditional curve, so curiosity initially, and then the process of discovery was quite interesting, how people were researching and finding out which of the devices were appropriate for them, then moving into apps, free apps, as much as possible, and then once they were buying into the actual devices, and then in many, many cases getting hooked on engaging with these wearable tech devices in a quite obsessive manner in many cases. So we identified 6 different archetypes of these users. So we can look at each of them in turn. The curious archetype, fairly common amongst the students that we worked with. Just interested, not that interested, didn't really have a disposable income to invest in the more expensive devices in this range. Keen to see the devices get smaller, more fashionable, cheaper. But, you know, finding that the devices were leading to behavioral changes directly. The controllers, quite a powerful group, one that really kind of looked at wanting to take control of their own data, viewed data as a commodity, and were very sophisticated in their knowledge of that and wanted to harness the power of that and the financial gains that could be accrued through that. But you see things like that quote there, if I was sharing my food entries, I definitely want to airbrush my own behavior for other people's eyes, and indeed hacking their own data to make those kinds of things possible. The quantified selfer, I'm sure most of you are familiar with that kind of term now. So, you know, I'm after a quantified self-utopia, but for now I'll just deal with what's available, but a vision about becoming the utopic vision of a quantified self-person, not afraid at all of that archetype or that vision. The self-medics, a very frequent group, feel abandoned by the NHS, by people that just don't believe. Often they have elements of anxiety and neurosis, you know, finding solace in these devices, looking to prevent delusion in their own behaviors and their own understandings of their daily activities by gathering data about themselves and then referencing that when they feel fear or anxiety or paranoia. The finish line fanatic, one that's often referred to in this context, so gamification psychology, very powerful for motivation. Using these devices to self-improvement, to seek to better themselves, to achieve more. Often these were the people that referred to advantages in professional lives that came alongside the wearing of these technologies and the use of them. And then the ubiquitors, which was tended to be even younger participants. We did a lot of work with primary schools and where we used some of the more, you know, prototype and early stage devices, the headbands, you know, trying to track brain waves and mental energy and concentration and these kinds of things, and associating that with elements of productivity and performance in daily life. And the ubiquitors are looking beyond what's here right now, looking immediately towards that future of wearable tech, where we're much more sophisticated, and similarly, a lot of the kind of maidens, the corporate maidens that were involved in this, looking to harness the power of that next generation. A lot of the study we did around the insurance companies and the idea that insurance companies are providing benefits to users. So if you're just a number in a large-scale algorithm for an insurance company and you get a policy based on your risk, now you can wear tech, and as you wear tech and you decide you're going to be healthier, you're going to eat better, it's tracking all that data in real time, and your policy is getting cheaper and cheaper all the time as your data falls. Not unlike the black boxes stuck in cars to reduce car insurance premiums, now you can deal with your own insurance providers and provide them with a real live stream of your data. And we found that about 1 in 5 participants would be willing to do that. It was a similar number to those who would be willing to share their data with government if there was a benefit to the government. So reflecting again on the PRISM and all this kind of stuff, 1 in 5 quite happy to share the most intimate data about their everyday activities if there was a benefit to community and social structures. But a big question coming up, what if my data is bad? And this was a question that, sure, it's great when you do that, but what happens if your insurance premiums start going up? What happens if a lot of these things are locked into about 2-year deals, where just like a phone contract, you say, I'll give you my data for 2 years, you can't break out of it once you've agreed to the agreement. And so then once you start getting less healthy, you're eating more poorly, you're not exercising as much, your premiums are going up, builds a lot of negative energy around yourself and a lot of questions about whether if your data is bad, you ever want to share it in that context. Quickly here, the wearable tech. This was a research subject we worked with, wearing the autographer, the wearable tech camera, taking a photograph based on 6 sensors. So photographs being taken at various times during his day as he moves through the day. These experiments were quite revealing. This was one he was willing to share. Here he's gone to a meeting, so he doesn't want to wear the device. Now he's back and he's moving around. He's moved it below his body. You're getting a different perspective on his daily experience. But this is effectively a 24-hour period in one person's individual's life as he moves around through this process. And the sensors are firing based on light and temperature and heartbeat and various things that are designed to kind of indicate that there's something happening within the space that's of note. So, he's off and he's eating his lunch, he saw him in the store. When you compile these, and this is where the big data possibilities and so on come in, within the movements of a community, and you aggregate that data across vast volumes of information, you can make sophisticated interactions with smart cities, with other sensor-based technologies. So there's a lot of possibilities in the scaling up of these wearable technologies and the possibilities that might afford. Obviously, there's a whole ton of people that are captured in these videos that have never signed releases. There's a whole bunch of implications around privacy that are embedded within the use of all these technologies. So lastly, I just wanted to touch on my current project that I'm working on, which relates in some ways. So I'm doing research into Bitcoin and particularly the rigs, the mints, the mine shafts. So I spent some time recently in a couple of squats where they're Anonymous and Goldman Sachs are together in the room, an unholy alliance, working closely together around framing and shaping the future of these kinds of emerging technologies. And when I spoke to those guys, particularly the Anonymous guys, who we know have all of these strongly held beliefs and convictions around privacy, and I asked them, what was the future of these kinds of Bitcoin technologies? Their response was, the idea that perhaps in a utopian Marxist viewpoint, you could see a world in which each Bitcoin had DNA embedded within it, or each human genome embedded within it, and each human, as they were born, was issued with a certain number of Bitcoins, which would give them their money for their life, and they couldn't spend anyone else's money because DNA was embedded within the funds that were allocated to them themselves. So a kind of real flip on its head around that. And I said, well, how's that going to work? And he flipped his finger over his shoulder and he pointed at some graffiti on the wall. If all else fails, use magic.
Chris, thanks very much. Our friend Peter is already Andy, the managing director of the service design consultancy Fjord. Andy is in Futures Digital Native since 1994 when he produced a documentary called Secrets of the Internet, now as one of the early pioneers of the service design industry, and he helps transform bonds of various brands into elegant design.
Michael. That was really nice talking, Chris, and the schedule is tight. This kind of moves onwards from there. So I'm going to go with a bit of rapture of the geeks now, because this is the sort of utopian future, or maybe dystopian, depending on your point of view, that we believe is going to come about once we actually start putting the tech, the wearable tech that we see now inside our bodies in a more distributed way. So, I didn't know I did it.
got to the technology.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we can't even get PowerPoint working. How are we going to get the other stuff going? So, the four texts that I think are going to be fundamental are genetics, nanotech, information, and by information I mean AI and learning systems. And AI is actually quite a tricky field, as we all probably know. It always seems to be about 20 years off. We always seem to think we're nearly there, but we don't get there. And then robotics. And I don't mean big robots, I mean small robots or parts of robots, stuff that we're putting inside our bodies. And I had a great chat once with Ken McLeod, the science fiction writer, and he said the trouble with all these visions is that no one really wants to stick to the metal in their bodies. No one wants to look like the board. Well, Thaddeus Starner and his bodies obviously did. And of course, this is quite early days in thinking about wearable tech, and it had a big, ongoing influence in Google Glass is here for us all to see. And I think what this demonstrates is that actually there's quite a big problem with wearable tech, is that it makes you look stupid. And all this kind of, not just wearing the stuff, which of course, there's a fashion issue there, but all the twitching and blinking and nodding and weird kind of movements you need to make. So this is actually just a barrier there. In the New Yorker reported that in San Francisco, Google Glass wearers are being referred to as glass holes, which I think is very nice. So we need to think a bit more about this. I actually am a little bit counter to what Ken McLeod said. I think that some people will quite like the idea of putting tech into their bodies. In the same way that we have been modifying our bodies for ever since humanity's been around. There are mummified remains from 33,000 years ago of cavemen with tattoos on them. And actually, part of this thing, part of the reason we adapt our bodies is to decorate. And I think there'll be some things happening in the area of decoration, which is then kind of taken forward, the technology is taken forward and used in some more functional ways. So, piercing was probably quite a marginal activity for a long time, but it has been absorbed by the mainstream. The same with tattooing as well. And maybe we aren't going as far as this guy. He sadly recently killed himself, but the Tiger Man. But the idea that we can reshape our bodies, particularly using in some cases surgery, but in other ways, other types of technology, is actually becoming more and more of a mainstream, acceptable idea. I don't know if you saw the Fast Company article a while back about extreme plastic surgery and this new idea of beauty. And I think it's really important to think about not just the technology, but the human aspects and desire and motivation, and why we want to do these things. What do we actually want to achieve? If we can imagine that we can augment our senses, isn't that changing us in a really fundamental way? If you can see, in extra wavelengths like mantis shrimp, or if you can see microscopically or long distance away through some kind of eye implant, does that change your perception of what you are, where you're placed in the universe? Well, we'll probably end up using it for much more mundane things. And this is from a few weeks ago, actually. I don't know if you saw the article. A Japanese marketing stunt to put advertising in places where young men would look. So, obviously, that's a good place to put it. So, at Fjord, we're actually working on a 4-year project for the EU, a consortium looking at smart materials. And this is a combination of advanced OLED technology and piezo. So, it's kind of the idea of creating these interactive surfaces that can obviously display information and changing information, but they can react and be interactive. And I can envisage a very thin skin OLED, which can be applied to the body and used as a display. And clearly, advertising and marketing are going to jump on that. People have already agreed to have branding tattooed on their bodies, so this sort of thing is far less invasive. And I think that'll be one interesting area. Now, the next thing that we do to our bodies, and we've done, again, over thousands of years, is this idea of optimizing them and repairing them. So, I found this great picture of some old false teeth. I was looking for Washington's wooden teeth, George Washington's, it's apocryphal. He actually had teeth like this that were made from ivory and other people's teeth. That's nice. But of course we're getting much more sophisticated with the way that we're replacing body parts. We're not just replacing them now, we're actually getting to the point where we can enhance the performance, and that's really interesting. This idea where we're not just delaying the apparent effects of aging and incapability, we're actually allowing us to do more. So Dr. Alan Kwan, who I believe is from Washington University, but I'm probably wrong about that, he's developed this cane which gives force feedback and it can actually allow blind people to feel, in a real sense, they can feel the objects in a room before they bump into them. So they can navigate across completely new spaces they've never been in before with great security. And this is one of my favourite XKCD comics. When Wikipedia has a server outage, my apparent IQ drops about 30 points. We all know this. This is what the wonderful, this is what the internet has given us, the ability to answer any question about who starred in what film just by looking up IMDb. So the exobrain is already there, it's just we don't have a direct connection with it yet. It's not our brains interfacing directly with the exobrain, we're having to use devices. But that device thing is going to start disappearing. And when we can bring together sensors, immersive displays, learning systems and gesture control, we can get magic. And we've been working on these things for a while now. Virtual reality, early experiments of virtual reality have led to the really fun things like the Kinect. And a little scenario we came up with, thinking about all those sensors and gesture control and things like that. So you're at a party, you see something you like across the room, your little eye camera does a sort of image recognition on them, goes to some server somewhere, pulls back all this information, and there's a 92% match. You like the same movies and the same food. So you start a pairing protocol with them, like some two Bluetooth devices. And if they like you, then you can go out to the balcony and have a glass of champagne. So this is quite a trivial use of this kind of technology, but actually this is also a strong motivation for people to use it. And the technology is almost here. It's not that futuristic. Samsung and Ghent University and again Washington University are working on the contact lens camera. The problem we have here is getting the power source into them, and using the body's heat energy and kinetic energy might be the way forward. Just a few weeks ago again, this is every week, look across all the newspapers, this stuff is happening day by day. These two guys were actually using a simple ECG cap and Skype to thought control each other. So one would make the other one push a button. Now, I can't imagine what that must have felt like, but apparently he wasn't compelled to do it. He could have not done it. It must have felt like some kind of urge motivating you to push the button. But we're getting to the point now where we're starting to be able to have some kind of refined thought control. And learning systems. This is the Richard Watson, who's an eminent futurist. He consulted McDonald's, and the problem they had was they couldn't make burgers quickly enough. 30 seconds isn't quick enough. It's got to be less than 30 seconds. So they could analyse the shape of a car and predict with 80% accuracy what you were going to order based on the car you were driving. So if we even ordered it, they can start making it for you. I'm going to have to skip through a couple, but the idea is that with all of these technologies coming together, our whole body is going to become an interaction canvas. I just want to do two last scenarios before I finish. That bring all these things together. So here we have this guy sitting having his coffee, and some kind of sensor is detecting his response to the coffee. Maybe it's the endorphins being released in the brain, the heart rate, all sorts of things like that, and it's kind of gauging how much he likes the coffee or what his response is to it, and then feeding that information back to the factory, the automated factory, which is making the blends, and is saying that actually we can make a better blend for him. So later that day, he's at the bus stop, and he's just waiting for his bus. And the factory has said, no, we now know what coffee you really like. So it starts pumping out this scent of this perfect coffee, which is much more attuned to his physiology. And then it just gives them the advert, and it gives them the offer to buy that coffee, and it closes the loop beautifully. So I hope we come up with more profound things than this, but I imagine this is the kind of thing that we'll be seeing, and I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm sure you all agree that's fascinating stuff from all three. So just in a moment we'll open this up to questions from the floor. But since I'm the moderator, I'm going to have the privilege of going first. I just wanted to touch on something that I think all three of you did. Actually, Chris, was your research that kind of grabbed me that 1 in 5 of those surveyed want Google Glass banned in public spaces, but conversely 1 in 5 people are happy to have all their data shared. I mean, are we at a point, this is for all three of you, are we getting to the point where wearable technology, embedded technology is for the mass market or simply for the niche? I mean, are we yet possessed of the values that underpin this type of technology?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that was clear to us is things are getting so small and so much more powerful that like a lot of the thing about the wearable tech, I think we're going to see that fusion now. It's not a linear development of those technologies, it's that fusion is resulting in. I think that wearable tech will kind of slowly recede as a category of things, and it's just going to be part of the technology of the now and the future. So I think wearable tech as a thing will recede, but it's really going to become more integrated and immersed into all of our everything.
I mean, and you mentioned cloud, obviously was very big for internet banks, and the culture novels, the neural waste, and the invisible piece of equipment that was in your head. I think if we can plant it in our heads, I think plenty of people would go for it. If you have to wear those silly looking spectacles, that knowledge just is the key.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this idea about privacy is really crucial, though, because I think there's two things. One, we're willing to trade privacy as a benefit. You know, if we can actually see that it's going to give us something useful, then maybe we're willing to trade it. People do that already. And secondly, I think it's a generational thing. I think maybe the people objecting, I would imagine it would not be 18-year-olds. I imagine it would be 50-year-olds like me.
I think I tend to agree. I mean, is there a problem, isn't it, that the public in general, I mean, this is a room full of early adopters, and I imagine a fair few people have already put down their order for Google Glass, for already. But is there a problem when it comes to wearable embedding technology that vast majority of the general public haven't been involved in the discussions around it, the morality of data gathering research?
I think in a way we are, because we already have conversations and you are involved in the notion of what's private and public, whether it's the state's risk to personal information. So we're very much involved. What I think is important to do is really think about the limitations and the approach that we take when we start thinking about the scenarios. And one of the risks is we know so little about consciousness. We know almost nothing about how human consciousness works. So we're talking a very mechanistic way of how we want to interact with each other, with the conversion of carbon or coffee. We really disregard a very fundamental part of it we don't know. So can we create space and come up with scenarios that also talk about, as those scenarios, authenticity, privacy, engagement, and that they're very fast starter and examples were there were two I remember examples. One is I wrote here, I don't see with my blue glasses or the glasses at the time. I don't remember the kids names or the wife's name, but I have the permission, result. Oh, how it is, I was John and Mary. But then what part of that is really interesting to you and how much of that is well. Of course, before I see you, look at my address book. But what happens with moments of authentic engagement? What happens where the 90% of me matching someone and we go for apples and we're jogging, but we really don't connect chemically and morally not there. So how do we create space to let that in? Is really, and it's possible, and a lot of it is outlining these scenarios and understanding the social implications, but for the entire ecosystem.
Charlie Schultz talks about Accelerando quite a lot, which is another great sci-fi book. But it certainly doesn't know whether it's him or whether the exo-brain telling him what to think, whether he fancies that woman, which I think is a really, really interesting concept.
Well, let's open it up to the floor. And gentlemen, when you're asking a question, you can just give us your name if you're from an organisation, shout it out as well. Gentlemen, right to the back with the first one.
Last week we were at a conference for airports, on the one hand, people are talking about investing in wearable technology for their staff for identification, and embedding technology as well to identify staff at the airport. On the other hand, they're saying they have no clue as to how they're going to deal with it when someone walks up with 6 wearable devices or 3 embedded devices, when they get to security screening. And there was actually some discussion on security people saying we would just not let those people come to our airport. Because they have no idea how to deal with it and how you have a consistent means of dealing with that. Do you think we're doing enough thinking about the consequences of some of these things alongside the benefits and opportunities of all these creators? We seem to be able to move very quickly in terms of the ideas and imagination, but seem to struggle a little bit with how do you actually embed this in society. I think goes back to your point about what are we actually trying to do here, what are the impacts and outcomes. How can you wake people up to this stuff with all the data?
I saw you shaking your head into it there. We clearly don't have the kind of the iterative technological evolution that we've had maybe 20 or 30 years ago. Things are happening at such a rate of change that it's almost impossible for us to see all the possibilities.
No, it's not. I mean, there's a great quote from Brown that says, look, planning is great, but you have to realize that plans don't work. Nevertheless, I think you need to engage it and have what very much we're doing today, the more concentrated forums, discussion with ethicists, with scientists, with technologists, and with the public. They can involve people in these really quick cycles of piloting and iterating and prototyping, and really, which is what you're doing to a large degree, take them up in the world, and then track and understand and analyze what are the implications, not just for technology, but for the social infrastructure. And we're seeing a big pushback for all the people that adopted technology, the many who drop technology. There's nothing bad or good about technology, but do we think about the implications and how we can more consciously do that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was really stunning to us, and I think we're going to see over this next year, is the amount of workplace usages of these wearable techs and the applications of them and the implications of that. We worked with 2 companies quite closely who are using it very aggressively to monitor concentration levels, stress levels, anxiety levels amongst their employees, also fitness levels. They incorporate performance bonuses for people when you're making high decisions in the workplace. Then you're being monitored in real time as to how focused you are when you make those decisions, and how much anxiety you have, how much distraction you've got. And this is something I think in the next year, many companies will be issuing, laptop, mobile phone, and Fitbit or whatever it is, right? And first rollout. But in the future, it's going to be, I think it's going to be part and parcel of your everyday work life, and that's going to be a stunning pace at which that sweeps over us, and you're not really going to have very many choices in that regard.
Right. And next question. Gentlemen, just back Thanks.
Is it a problem here? I don't think this is covered by the policy. I mean, shouldn't we be scared?
Should we be scared?
Yes, we should be scared. But they will actually pay, I think, for a lot of the experimentation. We had some other scenarios where we were thinking about actual social media in your, embedded underneath your skin. So, Facebook message or an alert or a mention on Twitter. So I think there'll be some personalized stuff, but yeah, the technology will be not necessarily used for benefit. I would agree. But how do you stop it?
Isn't that the case with any piece of scientific research? That's research for its own sake, and then you work out real world applications of it afterwards, and then you work out real world dangerous of it.
Yeah, it's a good analysis of it.
But at the same time, I think we do have an ambition to really do both, and it doesn't, and I think it is scary, and a lot of listeners with you are scared. So knowing that there's so many other issues that we need to deal with, so many bigger problems, how can we take that energy? And really it's about redefining our habits and saying, is this the kind of world that we want to live in, or do we want to really adjust it somewhere and really be more producers and consumers?
our high-tech timing system was telling me we starting to wrapping up soon, so I'm going to take 2 questions in one if possible. From the gentleman there who got beaten to the punch. Yes, yeah, definitely you this time. And the gentleman.
Hello, I'm not from India. So I just want to ask you, do you think there's a responsibility factor? Like, for example, we are in a situation where you're talking about thought control, you're talking about reading into thought, you're talking about suggestion for talking about something like that. What if a consumer is taking or a person is taking a decision based on that? But that decision calls for harm. And whose responsibility is it as an individual? At the end of the day, who takes responsibility of it? Is it the system? Is it is it the exobrain? Is it the individual? Who takes responsibility of it? And there's nothing wrong with taking responsibility because the sign of the paper. And the consumer not going to take responsibility. He says, I may influence for this. So at the end of the day, it becomes so everyone's responsibility becomes moving responsibility. That's the problem with it. So what do you guys think of the responsibility factor of it? So we are on the good stuff, but what if something goes bad? So what do you think? Who's responsibility?
Gotcha, and so just the gentleman there as well. Yeah, just ask it, we'll try and rattle through
the So, Chris, to your point about monitoring the aspects of employees as they belong, how would a Branson or a Jobs be able to do something in that type of environment? Because the innovation you guys are talking about is really creative technology. And if you start monitoring the emotions start getting judged, what does that do to our ability to innovate in the future?
I think it's a really good point. I can imagine a kind of reissuing of a class system around that, where we have kind of worker bees that are connected to the devices that are being monitored for particular simple performance and productivity measures, and then the creative class, which is the decision-making group that isn't connected to those devices in the same kind of way. So I take that on board. The kinds of things that these companies are monitoring are very simple measures, which themselves aren't even that reliable, and yet they're making key decisions based on the data that they're receiving. So we're seeing at least a real hunger to harness that. But certainly they're not volunteering to connect themselves to the devices when they're making that decision.
Very, very briefly to answer. Yeah, I suppose the first question is actually linked to that. On one hand, you have a group of individuals who choose to wear wearable technology. We're talking about a slightly parallel situation where you are forced to if you wish to continue employment with that company. To take the first question, who does responsibility allow the person who decides to put the watch on the person who manufactures?
Then, we start talking about free will, maybe. And there's a very interesting experiment, the Liebert test, which I don't know if you know about, which shows that actually your conscious brain doesn't decide what to do. It's your lizard brain, and then your conscious brain becomes aware of it. So maybe we'll just become a little bit more sensitive to the fact that there are all these outside forces playing on us the whole time anyway. And our conscious mind is willing to do that. I don't know whether that's a nice scenario or not. It's probably not.
Well, my lizard mind, unfortunately, is telling me we now have to wrap it up, so I'm sure you'll join me in thanking the 3 panelists for a fantastic discussion about something I'm sure we're all